This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where's the church going?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason. So if you get offended at what is said, it is not for you. But most importantly,
may you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
skepticize everything.
Welcome to this special presentation edition episode of the Naked Mormonism Podcast, the serial Mormon history podcast. My name is Bryce Blankenagel, and thank you for joining me. Before going into the audio of this episode, I need to let everybody know this was an actual video presentation that I presented at Sunstone Symposium on the life and times of Sidney Rigdon. So please check the show notes in the show links of the episode, and you will be able to find the actual video presentation there. It was kind of this small room venue area that I was presenting, but there are slides that go along with the video that add a whole lot of context to what you'll be able to see. But of course, if you don't want to see the video of it, you can just listen to the entire thing right here, and that's what we're about to get into. So without further ado, this was my first ever presentation at Sunstone Symposium on November 19th in Seattle.
Okay, welcome to the life of Sidney Rigdon. This should be very interesting. Let me read you a little bit about Blake. You can all see it in your programs. You can follow along if you'd like. Oh, Bryce, I'm sorry.
Everybody knows what that, so
okay.
I answer to it.
I'm sorry. The killer moderator. Bryce is full-time researcher and host and producer of the Naked Mormonism podcast in its first year of production. You do it naked.
Well, I'm a full-time podcaster. You don't need pants to podcast.
Naked Mormonism won 3 Brody Awards from the 3,700 minutes of audio it made available, which included nearly 8 hours on the Book of Mormon.
Yes.
So, welcome to Bryce.
Everybody ready to get started? Sidney Rigdon, I call him our forgotten hero of Mormonism. Of course, I'm here to build my case, why I think he is a forgotten hero. Now, this is my first Sunstone presentation. I only went to one Sunstone before this, and of course, if they will allow me to have me back, I'd love to have more of them, but I want to start every presentation with one question. Who listens to the Naked Mormonism podcast here? Perfect. Okay, I'm glad I brought all of my slides today. There's a lot of information to get through. That kind of determines the pace we can take this, but we have a lot of information to get through. There's our guy. There's Sidney Rigdon. That's the earliest known printing we have of him, the likeness of him. We don't know who took it, when it was, but that is the earliest picture we have of Sidney Rigdon. So, why Sidney Rigdon? You know, we want to correct the record. If Rigdon was responsible for more of Mormon history than we typically thought, we want to correct the historical record. Then, give Rigdon a chance. If he was labeled as a bitter apostate, who gave him that label and why? Then, intellectual honesty. This is interesting, right? Well, dozens of biographies exist surrounding Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, many other prominent people in Mormon history. Sadly, there's only a little bit of writing about Sidney Rigdon, and he had a life longer in preaching than Brigham Young and Joseph Smith ever did, so he's a fascinating individual. Then, of course, petition for more scholarship. Because there aren't enough biographies, there isn't enough information out there about this guy. There's a lot of information that needs to be out there. Please, help me out here. Let's get this guy on the books. And then, of course, we need to understand and champion Rigdon's wonderful legacy. We'll get into this soon, but once Brigham took over the church, he made a concerted effort to minimize Rigdon's impact on Joseph Smith and the church for various reasons. We'll talk about those. But we have, he was born of goodly parents in St. Clair Township, February 1793. Just a quick Google. That's Pittsburgh right there. It's about 10 miles south of Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was, of course, the biggest local population, urban population nearby, Sidney Rigdon. And then, of course, he was a bright young boy. He learned agriculture and the basic duties needed in order to serve and support a family. Along with Sidney, his father and older brother, who were William and Carvel respectively, they would support the family with farming for decades, even after Sidney's father died in 1810. Then according to Lomi, I'm not sure how to say that name, Lomi? Look at that name. I don't know, they named people weird back then. But he was a physician at this time. He said that Sidney Rigdon suffered a brain injury at the age of 7. We'll talk about it in a second. But Rigdon always wanted to learn. He was a bright young lad, reading by the firelight at night, gathering bark so that he can keep reading because his parents wouldn't give him candles. But he was denied further education because Lomi was sickly. He wasn't able to work on the farm, whereas Sidney Rigdon could work. So Lomi got the higher education and Sidney Rigdon didn't. It's kind of sad, actually. This is a line from Wycliffe Rigdon, who was Sidney Rigdon's son. Quote, "It was the rule in the country that when a boy was too feeble to work on a farm, they would send him to school, meaning higher education. Sidney wanted to go to school and pleaded with his father and mother to let him, but they would not consent, saying to him that he was able to work on the farm and he couldn't go." And this is from William Rigdon, his father's will. It says, "I designed my son Lomi to be a physician. I wish him to be conducted through learning and studies at the expense of the monies that I have appropriated for that purpose and under the care and direction of my executors." So William Rigdon had set aside a little fund so that Lomi could be a physician. But Sidney Rigdon never got that chance. Now, here's our accident. This is what we're talking about. This is what happened to Sidney Rigdon at the age of, we think, about 7. This is from Lomi. This quote, I'll just read briefly. Quote, "Sidney Rigdon, when quite a young boy living with his father some 15 miles south of Pittsburgh on a farm, was thrown from his horse, his foot entangled in a stirrup, and dragged some distance before relieved. In this accident, he received such a contusion of the brain," remember this is a physician telling this, "as ever after seriously to affect his character, and in some respects, his conduct. In fact, his brother," meaning Carvel, "always considered Sidney a little deranged in his mind by that accident. His mental powers did not seem impaired, but the equilibrium in his intellectual exertions seemed thereby to have been sadly affected. He still manifested great mental activity and power, but he was to an equal degree inclined to run into wild and visionary views on almost every question. Hence, he was a fit subject for any movement in the religious world." Rigdon's mind was changed forever. This is a list of unclaimed letters. So the post office back then didn't work how it works today. People didn't drive around in little vans and give you your post back then. They just had the post office and they would publish this in the weekly periodicals, a list of unclaimed letters. The emphasis is added on the names in this list of unclaimed letters in 1816, courtesy of Dale Broadhurst on SidneyRigdon.com. There's Sidney Rigdon and Solomon Spaulding on the same unclaimed letters list. We have Rigdon became a preaching grasshopper. He became very interested in becoming a preacher. He was very emotive, very able to rile up a crowd. So, what better to do than be a preacher? So, he moved to the Western Reserve in 1819, and he received his ministerial license as an actual Baptist minister of the Redstone Association. And he moved on, Mahoning. After the Redstone, he moved on to the Mahoning Institution. Meaningless distinctions for us, but back then this was like big stuff for them. After that, he gave his first sermon on April Fool's, 1820. What better day? Then he moved in with his best friend, Adamson Bentley, and married Adamson Bentley's sister-in-law, Phoebe Brooks. Now, maybe odd to point this out, but a lot of us here are engaged in Mormon history, and we have to say this about just about everybody. Sidney Rigdon didn't have multiple wives. He was one of the very few men that we talk about in Mormon history that didn't have multiple wives. In fact, he hated polygamy. From what we can tell, Phoebe Rigdon was his only wife for 56 years until he died. He had a wonderful, blissful marriage. This is from Van Wagner's biography on Sidney Rigdon called A Portrait of Religious Excess, and he describes Phoebe Brooks. We want to get her engaged in this too, because no man is who he is without the woman behind him, or whatever her sexual preference is. But this is from Wagner, quote, "Well educated for her day, with a fine mind and exquisite penmanship, Phoebe was a remarkable woman, birthing 12 children and burying several. She ultimately was ordained prophetess and served as a ranking leader in her husband's church in the 1860s. This was years after Joseph had died. For 56 years, she never stopped loving him nor believing his visions and mystical assurances. Unlike everybody else, when her Lord and Master died, Phoebe saw something more than a wasted life in pursuit of a fool's dream of glory. She's a remarkable person. After that, Rigdon became a student of Zionism, Restorationism. Anybody know about that? That was big stuff. We all believed in it. We're all Mormon, right? We all believe that the Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built on the American continent and it will receive its paradisiacal glory, right? Anybody remember memorizing that? Well, that's what Sidney Rigdon started studying, and well, there were a lot of people that were putting forward these ideas at the time. The Campbells. We have Thomas Campbell on the left, father, and son Alexander Campbell on the right. If anybody knows about the Baptists in the Burnover District in the Western Reserve area, the Campbells were the celebrities. Everybody thought the Campbells were the coolest. Alexander Campbell was an absolute master debater. He would take on anybody. And his father, Thomas, kind of formulated a lot of the arguments and the theology that was going on that they considered the Mahoning or the Redstone Baptist movement at the time. They immigrated from Ireland in 1807 and immediately started preaching, publishing pamphlets, writing their own Bible, their own proprietary version of the Bible. It's remarkable. But Alexander Campbell was the guy that Rigdon revered, and he became his mentor. And they became good friends. So that's probably the most remarkable point. We have Alexander Campbell as a prominent person in religious history, and Sidney Rigdon, a prominent person in religious history in another respect, coming together and being good friends. But it wasn't that simple. Zionism was Rigdon's forte, and before he started studying under Campbell, but Campbell just sort of honed his arguments, made it so that Rigdon could be a good debater and a good preacher. But in Alexander Campbell, he had a debate in 1820, widely publicized debates. There was even printings in the Wayne Sentinel, Palmyra, of this debate. I mean, everybody in the area knew about this debate. They didn't have TV. What else are they going to do? Watching preachers go debate each other. So Rigdon became too hot to handle. He started this is just some of the other things he was preaching that other preachers thought were anathema, or they were heretical or from the devil or whatever. It'd take hours to try and parse through that, but the final point that we are most interested in is a common stock system, because that was Rigdon's white horse. He always wanted to try on some version of communism, or communalism as it was called back then. A small group of people living in an area, they give all of their possessions to an ecclesiastical authority, and then that authority distributes the possessions as they see fit. Does that sound like the United Order, anybody? Yeah. Joseph tried it. It didn't work many times, and it failed every time. So that was one thing that Rigdon was known for, was his common stock system. He wanted communism. So then he had to break away. Rigdon had to become his own preacher. He couldn't follow the dictates of all of the other preachers in the area. He had to be the outsider, become this new Rigdonite theology. So it morphed and became what it was. Well, it was something in and of itself, to be specific. There was a widely publicized debate in 1830 between Alexander Campbell and Sidney Rigdon. They mentor and student, and they came head-to-head in 1830. And from all contemporary accounts, Campbell just destroyed Rigdon, just slaughtered him in this debate. But Alexander Campbell was an absolute master at this. He was in his 50s. Sidney Rigdon was in his late 30s. Campbell had been doing this for decades. He treated all of his debate opponents with the same level of viciousness, as one might say. So Rigdon was a little hurt after this. I mean, his mentor had absolutely squashed him, and the papers were publicized about how terribly Rigdon did in this debate. That's kind of hard for somebody that's trying to create their own theology. And that sadly enough for Rigdon, that's what happened. But he continued to build his own ministry. And the decade from 1820 to 1830, this is when he built his church. He had upwards of 10 congregations in Ohio and Pennsylvania. He would maybe preach at them once a month, or he would go there weekly and preach. Anywhere from small families just gathering in a living room to entire congregations of more than 100 people, like in Mentor and Kirtland. I mean, he was building up a Rigdonite following long before Joseph Smith ever came up with anything about the plates or anything like that. Of course, there was one problem, as some would call it. Rigdon wasn't stable. Now, we have kind of an issue. We run into a problem with history here. Here is a quote from Alexander Campbell, who was Rigdon's mentor. We've established who he is. Quote, "Rigdon's instability. I was induced to ascribe a peculiar mental and corporeal malady to which he had been subject for some years. Fits of melancholy, succeeded by fits of enthusiasm, accompanied by some kind of nervous spasms and swoonings, which he has, since his defection, interpreted to be into the agency of the Holy Spirit, or the recovery of spiritual gifts, produce a versatility in his genius and deportment, which has been increasing for some time." So, Alexander Campbell said, Rigdon would have swoonings and signs, and he wasn't exactly stable. Here's another quote. Rigdon spoke very rapidly and used to get tremendously excited so that he foamed at the mouth while preaching. I mean, we're starting to see some inklings that this guy might not be 100% stable. This is from Newell K. Whitney, who was the first bishop in the church, basically. Quote, "He was always either in the bottom of the cellar or up in the garret window." He's super sad or super happy. This is from Jedediah Grant, who some know as Brigham's sledgehammer. Quote, "Elder Rigdon would not only soar as if it were the highest heavens in rapture of delight, but when dark clouds overspread his horizons, he would also sink into the lowest state of despondency." This is from Wycliffe Rigdon, his son, Sidney Rigdon's son. You think he knew something about his dad. Quote, "Being of a bilious temperament, he was sick most of the time in Nauvoo, Illinois. For weeks at a time, he would not be able to leave his bed." Any of you guys have Monday mornings like that? Then we get to the detour that changed the world. Joseph had commissioned the Book of Mormon to be printed in March of 1830. It was published. Then he organized the first church April 6, 1830 in Manchester or Fayette. We don't really know. There's dispute about where it actually was. But Oliver Cowdery, Harley Pratt, Zyder Peterson, they constituted the first missionary group, and they were going out to Jackson County, Missouri. On the way to Jackson County was a small detour to go to Ohio. And that's what they did. At the request of Parley P. Pratt, who was one of Rigdon's parishioners for years, they decided to take a quick detour and go over and visit his old friend Sidney Rigdon. And Rigdon took a copy of the Book of Mormon. Now, he read it. Did he have a miraculous conversion? Yeah, we don't know. We can't say. As a historian, it's hard to say if somebody actually had a miracle happen, right? But we can say we know what the person said about their experience and relay that information. So, was what Rigdon had a miraculous conversion? Well, upon receiving a copy of the Book of Mormon, he studied it for weeks. We look back at it this time in Mormon history and it's a blink of an eye, but Rigdon spent a lot of time studying this. He was torn to pieces about whether or not the Book of Mormon was true from his own accounts. But of course, he received a miraculous vision, and this is how Alexander Campbell, our friend and mentor who had crushed Rigdon, said, quote, "Rigdon had been fasting and praying for several days when one of his fits of swooning and sighing came upon him. He saw an angel and was converted." Now, if somebody isn't necessarily stable, mentally speaking, and they go on a day or two of fasting, not eating food, not drinking water, their brain is in a heightened state of instability at that point. And that was the time when Rigdon said that he had a feeling come over him telling him the Book of Mormon was true. Can we trust that? Can he trust that? Well, he did. And, well, we have what we have now. Sidney Rigdon was part of the entire history of Mormon Church. And then, of course, some would claim that everything, the whole mission troop going out to Ohio, all of it was just a ruse, covering up a facade of what was going on in the background. Those are people that align with the Spalding theory. I'd love to talk with some of you after the class about that. But Rigdon said, I got to meet this guy. I got to meet Joseph Smith. So he did. He had this miraculous conversion, and then the majority of people in Kirtland, Ohio converted. Then Rigdon had to meet him in person, and Kirtland eventually became the stronghold for the church. So Rigdon went out to Palmyra with Edward Partridge to meet Joseph and his wife, Emma, of course. And then upon arrival, the situation revs up, and Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith became inseparable. As soon as he arrived, they revealed Doctrine and Covenants in today's Doctrine and Covenants, section 35 to 40. Those were all revelations that were given to Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith, not just to Joseph Smith. The Joseph Smith translation of the Bible that no Mormons use today, they started that at that time. This was an important time in Mormon history. If not for Rigdon going out to Palmyra, him and Joseph might never have hooked up, might never have actually made what happened happen. So they go to Kirtland, Joseph's new home. I'm going to kind of skip through this. That's just a beautiful picture I took off of Kirtland's website. It's a nice little town, and there's a lot of history there right now. Then when Joseph moves to Kirtland, this is what I call a revelation avalanche, because the revelations just pour in. It's remarkable how much happens at this time, and they were used for everything, whether it was this person do this thing, you go on a mission here, you go buy a printing press, you go out to Independence, Missouri and find Zion. These revelations were how everything was done. It was all through a pipeline to God. God was telling us how to run the church. And this is where the first appearance happens of the Melchizedek priesthood. Now, you might say, well, how did Joseph run the church without the Melchizedek priesthood? I thought he got it in 1829 after he was baptized. Well, there's no account of that. This is the first time it shows up in any historical record, 1831. You know, for being the foundational authority for the church, that kind of is a bit of a problem. Before that, they were just using the word authority. Then we have Joseph Smith's history makes a first appearance, his 1832 version of the first vision account. You compare that to today's first vision account, there's some vast differences there. We could go into that. Grant Palmer's An Insider View of Mormon Origins does a great job of deconstructing that. Please check it out. The revelations were used to solve every problem, and of course, they were money related. So many of them had to deal with money. God can create a universe out of nothing, but he cannot handle a dollar. So, to Zion! Of course, we got Zion. This is Zionism. This is a restorationist cult. We got to find where Zion is. Happens to be Jackson County, Missouri. So, mid-June 1831, Rigdon and Joseph left Kirtland, their strongholds, to go out to Jackson County, Missouri. But unfortunately, Zion wasn't all that great. It was kind of a dirt lot, swamp town. People didn't really like it that much. But they did designate it was Zion, and that this would be the ground zero for rapture. This is where the Mormon Jesus is going to come back and begin reigning the new world. And where it was dedicated, Sidney Rigdon gave the dedication, preach, sermon, and prayer. Joseph Smith was in a nearby town. He was laying foundations for houses. But Sidney Rigdon was up there on the stand preaching for 2 hours saying, this is Zion, we're consecrating this ground as our rapture. Why wouldn't the prophet of the church do that? Why was it Sidney Rigdon that was doing that? These are interesting questions I ask myself constantly. But of course, during Zion's camp, this is a very important point. In 1834, Joseph marched with 200 armed men out to Missouri, trying to reinstate the Mormons into their Jackson County homes. And during this time, Joseph ordained Sidney Rigdon as president of the church. This is in 1834. This is one of the first times that Joseph delegated the presidency of the church to somebody else while he was gone. And it stuck. He was known as President Rigdon from then on. It was always just referred to as President or Elder Rigdon. So it's very important that Joseph Smith ordained him at this time. That's going to come in handy a little bit later. Of course, there was trouble in paradise. Kirtland wasn't always safe. They were tarred and feathered in 1832. Here's just this is a Boston Tea Party depiction, but I mean, the mob tried to poison Joseph and Rigdon in Hiram, Ohio. They tarred and feathered him. They beat Rigdon absolutely senseless. This is a quote from Wycliffe Rigdon talking about the beating. His father's beating. Quote, "He was insensible. His assailants pounded him till they thought he was dead, then went to get Joseph Smith." And unfortunately, during that, they dragged Rigdon out of his house, and the men that did it grabbed his legs, his heels up over their shoulders, and ran out of the house with him. And he was dragging his head all on the ground on the way. And it's in the middle of winter in Ohio. He's just banging his head across the frozen tundra and rocks. So somebody that had a brain injury from a young age suffers another brain injury and is left out into the cold of the winter night. You know, that's not something we want to do to somebody that's already mentally stable, but to somebody like Rigdon, well, for a few weeks, he couldn't even get out of bed. He asked Joseph Smith for a razor so he could kill his wife. He asked his wife for a razor so he could kill Joseph Smith. Rigdon was teetering on the edge for a few weeks after this. It's very, very weird to read accounts from this time. But of course, there's also the Kirtland Safety Society. Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon created their own bank, basically, with banknotes, their own proprietary banknotes. Anybody up close, maybe? Can you read the signatures on the bottom of that banknote? Yeah?
Yeah, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon.
All right. Joseph Smith, cashier. Sidney Rigdon, president. Why wasn't the president of the church the president of the Kirtland Safety Society? Why was Sidney Rigdon the president of the Kirtland Safety Society? Kind of interesting to think about. Why is it that Sidney Rigdon is being given these offices and these jobs that are above Joseph Smith? There's no real answer to it. But of course, there was mob violence constantly happening. Disaffecting Mormons were pulling people away. They founded the Danites in 1837 as an answer to it. And then, of course, Kirtland wasn't safe anymore, so they had to run to Missouri so they can survive. And, well, things got crazy in Missouri for a little while. They had a temporary respite, but there were very few sanctuaries that existed for the Mormons, especially the leadership, because people hated them. People were chasing them out of their homes. People were burning their houses down, destroying their places of business. People just didn't like the Mormons. And there's a lot to deal with that. That's an hour in and of itself of presentation. But, of course, Sidney Rigdon couldn't let this respite lie. He gave the Salt Sermon. Has anybody heard of the Salt Sermon? Rigdon's famed big speech. One person in the back. Well, this is what it says. Ye are the salt of the earth. That the salt has lost its savor, it is thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden underfoot. So basically, Sidney Rigdon is saying anybody that's the salt of the church that has left, they've lost their savor. Let's cast them out and trod them under our feet. And this, a lot of historians point to, this is the turning point for Missouri and the Mormons. This is when mob violence gets crazy. This is, that Salt Sermon was given in June of 1838. But the 4th of July speech, I think, really kind of encapsulates Sidney Rigdon a lot better. I'm going to read a pretty good passage from it. Pardon me for this, but I'm going to try and channel Sidney Rigdon here. Quote, that a mob comes on us to disturb us, it shall be between us and them a war of extermination. For we will follow them till the last drop of their blood is spilled, or else they will have to exterminate us. For we will carry the seat of war to their houses and their own families, and one party or the other shall be utterly destroyed. Remember it, all men. Now we as the people of God do declare and decree by the great Jehovah, the eternal and omnipotent God, that sits upon his vast and everlasting throne beyond the ethereal blue, we will bathe our swords in the vital blood of the Missourians or die in the attempt. End quote. Oops. That's Sidney Rigdon, people. That is who was Joseph's second in command, or some might say co-creator of the church. You wonder why the Missourians didn't like him. Imagine somebody from Boko Haram moving into Iowa and creating a small commune that builds up to a few thousand members, and they give a sermon like this. We'll bathe our swords in the blood of the Missourians? You wonder why they were scared. Of course, at this point, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon began writing the history of the church. Everything in Rigdon's own history, he dictated, and it's all in third person. It's really weird to read. It's not uncommon at the time, but he says we and stuff, and Sidney Rigdon, he refers to himself in the second or third person. When you read it with the mind that maybe he had something going on, some of the verbiage is very, very weird. Of course, they changed the name of the church to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints at this time. That was at the request of Sidney Rigdon. Started as the Church of Christ. During Zion's camp, they changed it to the Church of the Latter-day Saints. And then finally, that's when we got the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It took them until 1839 to get that on board. Then they were taken to jail, Liberty Jail. And then after Liberty Jail happened, Sidney Rigdon organized an escape attempt. Somehow he convinced a guard to scrap with him, and then he ran away. Who knows? But then they bought swampland in Illinois that was known as Commerce, and then it was changed to Nauvoo, and now we have the genesis of Mormon Zion in Illinois. So there have been many Zions at this point. This is just the next one on the way. Of course, we have the ague, as they called it back then, and it was sickness. We call it malaria today, but malaria comes from mal and area, meaning bad air, malaria, and that's what they thought it was. It was due to the fumes that were coming out of the swamp, but no, it was mosquitoes. They were passing malaria on, so the people back then didn't have any way to vaccinate it, so they just sort of built up an immunity to it. But at this time, Rigdon was sick. He didn't spend much time doing anything church-related. He was a postmaster, that was about it. Didn't spend much time. But then, 1844, General Joseph Smith for President of the United States, Vice President, Sidney Rigdon of Pennsylvania. I can think of very few people in the world that would be a worse president than Joseph Smith. The end of Nauvoo. Joseph died in the Carthage jail shootout in 1844, but this was just a point in Rigdon's life. It wasn't the end of anything really for him. He, among others, had rightful claim to the presidency of the church. Remember, back in Zion's camp, Joseph had ordained him to be president of the church while Joseph was gone. He did that in case Joseph died while they were on Zion's camp. So, Rigdon had the rightful claim to be president of the church. Of course, we have, after Joseph's death, a bitter public battle ensued. We call it a schism crisis now. It was a fight between Brigham and Sidney Rigdon and many other people that said, I have the claim to the throne. John Bennett was thrown in there, James Strang was thrown in there, a bunch of people all claiming, I'm the new prophet, I have a revelation. But Rigdon was Joseph's spokesperson, and he was designated to be Joseph's spokesperson from the other side of the veil as well. So Rigdon was planning on channeling Joseph and continuing to run the church. But Brigham Young, being this businessman that he was able to squeeze Rigdon out. And that was the end of their discussions. From that time forward, Rigdon's name would be maligned in Mormon history. And this is where it comes back to the first slide, why Sidney Rigdon. We got to correct the record. This guy was responsible for so much more than initially thought, and we really got to involve him in everything about Mormon history and not just forget about it. He moved to Pittsburgh to run away from the Brighamites. They chased him out of town. Rigdon had to run away so many times from mobs that were chasing him. I mean, it wasn't just during his Mormon years, it was frequently throughout his entire life. It was a habit at this time. This is Sidney Rigdon. This is about the 1840s. This is about the time that he would have broken off, about the age of 51 years old. Got a little frosting on the beard there. You know, sexy devil, isn't he? Never stopped fighting. On excommunication, he was able to pull about 400 people away from the church that considered him the one true prophet. Most of those people, they were Rigdon parishioners before Joseph Smith, and then during the Joseph Smith years, they still believed in Rigdon. And then after Joseph died, they continued to believe in Rigdon. So they were like lifelong Rigdonites, basically. So that's the majority of those 400 people. Of course, his wife, Phoebe Rigdon, never left his side. She believed in everything that he said. It's remarkable. One of the very few people on the planet that until Rigdon's death, Phoebe never stopped loving him. She never stopped believing in who he was. She's a remarkable woman. But the revelations never stopped. And this is the exciting part. Would you like to play a game?
Yeah.
Who wants to win a t-shirt? Anybody? Who knows their Doctrine and Covenants first? That's what I should ask. We have a Anybody? All right. If not, then we're all going to play. No one gets a t-shirt, so somebody might as well come forward and get a t-shirt. All right, we're going to get her the t-shirt. It's going to be a little big for you, but we'll get you a t-shirt. All right. What does everybody think about trying to figure out some revelations? Are they Doctrine and Covenants, or are they Sidney Rigdon's revelations? Here's our control. We're getting started, but there's a few of these slides. All right, I'm going to read these as we go. It seemeth unto me, the Lord your God, that your whole heart and soul should be alive to the great things which are preparing to roll unto Zion. That was a Rigdon revelation in number 96. That was given in about 1873, I believe it was. Long after Joseph's death. All right. Hearken, O you people of my church and ye elders, listen together and hear my voice while it is called today. and harden not your hearts. For verily I say unto you that I am Alpha and Omega,
This is not big.
the beginning and the end, the light and the life of the world, a light that shineth in darkness, and darkness comprehendeth it not.
It's DNC.
DNC or Rigdon?
DNC.
Everybody say, you're saying Rigdon, everybody's saying DNC. Oh, DNC 45, good one. All right, next one. To my servant, okay, I had to take out some names because anybody that knows a little bit about history, those are dead giveaways. So I'm not going to give it to you that easy. So to my servant blank, I am God, and beside me there is none else. I create and destroy. From me goeth all power in heaven above and in earth. In me are treasures of wisdom, and from me wisdom goeth among the children of men. All things are present before me, and I comprehendeth all things. Rigdon? No, you guys know your Doctrine and Covenants. That's 95, given about 1873 as well. All right, let the priests then seek diligently to understand the duties which belong to their calling, that they may approve themselves unto the Lord, lest through negligence they come short and fail.
DNC.
DNC? Everybody saying DNC? A split. All right, a split. All right.
Nice idea.
All right, that was from the same one as the previous one, still on that 95. All right. It is your eternal salvation after which you are seeking, and the Lord desires to show you how you can obtain it. For it was on this wise that all the angels of the pavilion obtained their situation, and it is on this wise you will become heirs with them. Rigdon doesn't sound like Doctrine and Covenants?
There's no pavilion on Doctrine.
Oh, sorry, that was Phoebe Rigdon's revelation. I told you, she's a prophetess. She gave her own revelations. But she never said, thus saith the Lord in hers. That was always Rigdon that said that. All right. Behold, blessed saith the Lord are they who have come up unto this land with an eye single to my glory, according to my commandments. For them that live shall inherit the earth, and them that die shall rest from all their labors, and their works shall follow them. They shall receive a crown in the mansions of my Father, which I have prepared for them. Rigdon and DNC. DNC? Oh, Book of Commandments, yes, DNC. Doctrine and Covenants came from the Book of Commandments, so yes, 59. Good job, yes, you guys, I'm impressed. When I was putting this together, I didn't even know for sure, so I'm really impressed. All right, therefore I, the Lord, say unto my servant Joseph, go forth in the power of your high and holy calling, knowing that your trespasses remember no more, but be faithful in the trust committed to your charge, and sin no more. Your promise shall be sure, and your reward certain. DNC? Oh, 1925! Oh, only a couple people got that one.
Was that a revelation to Joseph Smith then? That Rigdon had?
Oh no, that was a I think Joseph Newton.
Okay.
Oh, there's an yeah. Oh, look at that. Whoops, I think I got everybody on that one. All right. Behold and hearken unto the voice of him who has all power, who is from everlasting to everlasting, even Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. Behold, verily, thus saith the Lord unto, O ye elders of my church who are assembled upon this spot, whose sins are now forgiven you, for I, the Lord, forgiveth sins, and am merciful unto those who confess their sins with humble hearts. Rigdon or Doctrine and Covenants?
Rigdon.
Rigdon? Oh, Book of Commandments. Ooh, yes, close, but not quite. There's only a couple more of these. And verily mine eyes are upon those who have not as yet gone up into the land of Zion, wherefore your mission is not yet full. Of course, Zion. This is the appearance of that word again. Rigdon? I heard DNC in the back. 2 Rigdons. DNC. All right, we're pretty evenly split. Oh, Book of Commandments, Doctrine and Covenants. Look at that. All right, behold, saith the Lord, it is my will that the children of Zion should pay tithes of all they possess. Of course, a lot of revelations that Rigdon and Joseph gave were related to tithing. And I require that my servant blank, I kept that name out, should set the example to the rest of the children of Zion in offering his tithes of all he has, and then as Bishop of Zion, call on all the rest to do likewise. Rigdon, yeah, that was a weird one. That's definitely a Rigdon one. Therefore, saith the Lord, let all presidents, high priests, elders, priests, and deacons see to it as one of the principal duties of their respective callings. DNC? It's got a split. DNC or Rigdon? Oh, that's the Rigdon revelation. You want to see the rest of that one? And let all those who are set apart for authorities belonging to the female department of the kingdom be peculiarly careful that the duty of the teaching the righteousness of the kingdom is attended to. Rigdon was an equal opportunity revelator. Women had just the same offices as men had in his churches from, well, of course not during the Joseph years, but before and after, he was quite equal with women. It's really remarkable. But if you will repent and return unto the Lord your God, I will turn away mine anger, saith the Lord. Yea, thus saith the Lord, blessed are they who will repent and return unto me, but woe unto him that repenteth not. D&C? Oh, that's the Book of Mormon. Crap. You went 13, 10 through 11. All right, that's the end of the game. All right. And we got a t-shirt. Want to come up here? Got a t-shirt. Where are you? T-shirt.
Thank you.
I do grab. There you go. All right. All right. Thanks for playing the game, everybody. We're all winners here at Sunstone. Now, we ought to move on to the rest of Rigdon's life. New York, he moved to Friendship. He went on to lose and gain small handfuls of followers, being virtually destitute his entire life. His Rigdonite church died in 1849, and then a guy named Stephen Post, who was a lifelong follower of Rigdon, reconnected with him and began starting up the Rigdonite church in 1860s again. They shared amazing correspondence that we have record of. We still have the Post collections. The church owns it. He shared a correspondence with Sidney Rigdon until his death at the age of 83 in 1876, and with Phoebe until she died. She was 7 years younger than Sidney, and she lived for another decade after that. She didn't follow Rigdon's Canadian Zion. He revealed that Zion was up in Canada at this point. It was like the 9th Zion by this time. But she didn't follow the followers up there. There was like 2 small handfuls of families that eventually disbanded after Rigdon's death. But his funeral was held in the Friendship, New York Masonic Lodge. He was basically a lifelong member of the Freemasons. In response to Brigham Young's invitation, Wycliffe Rigdon wanted to repair the chasm between Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young. In response to Brigham Young's invitation to bring Sidney Rigdon back into Utah, or to Utah, because Rigdon never stepped foot in it, Rigdon said that I will consent to coming out to Utah and saying the church is true. If you give me the keys to the kingdom, you make me president, you tell everybody the truth, you tell them you all lied and that I was the one true prophet, and Brigham Young never wrote him back. I did not. Then we move on to what I would call historical conjecture. Now, as a historian, it's very hard to try and diagnose or ascertain motives to somebody that lived 200 years ago. But I'm a podcaster, right? I don't have a degree in history. It's not like I'm putting my degree on the line when I say I think Sidney Rigdon had something wrong with his head. But I'm using that backed up with a lot of quotes here. This is from Orson Hyde, quote, "Sometimes in a gust of passion or a flight of fancy, Elder Rigdon takes the comet's track and flies almost beyond the bounds of space and time, but at other times he is completely in the jaws of despair." This is from Amasa Lyman. "When Rigdon wasn't sick, he was merely content to sleep and smoke his pipe and take his drink all the while." And this is from Wycliffe Rigdon, his son. "Sidney Rigdon had no executive ability, was broken down with sickness, and could not have taken charge of the church at the time." He's talking in 1844. "The task would have been too great for father. I have no fault to find with the church with doing what they did. It was the best thing that they could have done under the circumstances." Of course, saying making Brigham the prophet. And that was published in Salt Lake City. Rigdon's own son never followed Sidney Rigdon after Joseph died. Followed Brigham Young, and he died in Utah. So maybe that tells us why he was trying to repair the chasm between Sidney Rigdon and Brigham Young. Maybe helps to explain why Sidney Rigdon's name was so drastically maligned in history. There's our Sidney Rigdon. This is a poem that he wrote in the mid-1860s. "Precious are his years to come when the righteous gather home for the great millennium, where he'll rest in blessedness. Prudent in this world of woes, he will triumph o'er his foes, while the realm of Zion grows, pure for eternity." To wrap it up, if we remember back to that first slide, I want to correct the record. I want to talk about Sidney Rigdon and try and understand his real impact on Mormon history. He's a wonderful individual. He had an amazing, colorful life. He might have had some screws loose, but that makes him even more exciting to study. And there just isn't enough research out there surrounding him. There have been a few biographies done. Of course, Richard Van Wagner's Portrait of Religious Excess is a wonderful biography. I relied on it very heavily for creating this presentation. And he kind of made this seminal biography, and then from then on, Rigdon's work hasn't really gone anywhere. There are a few people, Craig Criddle and Dale Broadhurst, who are always been in the background working on it, but we like to study history, and every single person in Mormon history has their own story. They're all human beings. They're not just names with dates and say they got ordained and baptized on this day and had 12 kids. They're human beings. They have their own experiences. Sidney Rigdon I find to be one of the most compelling individuals in Mormon history. And I think, that being said, we should remember him. He should not be the forgotten hero of Mormonism. So with that, I guess that's it. Thanks to Richard Van Wagner. That's how you can contact me. And that's Sidney Rigdon, I guess. So just a little bit of time for questions. Anybody?
Real quick, I'm so sorry. Before we have questions, I'm worried I'll forget. The next session was supposed to be 2 upstairs and down here. Instead, we're all going to meet upstairs first and then decide. I guess they kind of overlap, so we're going to decide how people want to split up. So everybody just goes up to the chapel for the next session.
Okay. Was he an abolitionist?
Let's see. I'm trying to remember if I read anything about his stances on it. I don't recall anything. I know Joseph was kind of middle ground, but as his presidential bid came along, he sided more with abolitionism. But Sidney Rigdon, I don't know what his stances were on that. People have seen something about it.
Was it his idea to call the priesthood the Melchizedek priesthood?
So that's kind of a big question, because the Melchizedek priesthood, the question was it Rigdon's idea? I'm repeating the question for recording purposes. Was Rigdon responsible for Melchizedek priesthood, basically? Well, when Sidney Rigdon and Joseph Smith teamed up, that's when Melchizedek priesthood makes its first appearance. That's also when baptisms of the dead first happened, anointing ceremonies. A lot of very Rigdon proprietary things happen when Joseph and Rigdon team up together. But as far as Melchizedek priesthood, I personally believe, that was all Rigdon, 100%.
So the most significant thing that I've always known about Sidney Rigdon is that he and Joseph had the vision of the Savior in the Kirtland Temple.
Yes.
And
a lot of people do.
And so what, do you have any background about, did they write it together? Or did Joseph write it and Rigdon approve, or is there any more details about the authorship of that revelation? So,
kind of talking about the methods of revelation that they were done, basically. So as far as the Kirtland Temple revelations go, I have my own theories about that. I think are fairly well substantiated. I think there was something special about the anointing oil that they were using and the wine that they were drinking. Because it caused a lot of different people to see a lot of different things. And it was very repeatable. Every time they had this anointing oil, they saw something. So that being said, like when it came to if you read through the history of the church, when Rigdon and Joseph were working on the Joseph Smith translation of the Bible, it's a question and answer session. One of them is channeling God, while the other one is asking God questions, basically. They're going through the history of the church. I think this is volume 2, where it talks about them reading through the book of Revelation and trying to parse out what is that. And it's a question of answer of, what is meant by the woman living on the moon? What is meant by the 7-headed demon and with the 10 horns? And it's a question and answer session. And it just came from a seance type of channeling ceremony. So really weird stuff.
So you did mention the fairly relevant fact that Sidney was in the first presidency in 1844,
yeah,
and that the other 2 members were Joseph and Hiram, and they were gone then in 1844. So as the sole remaining member of the first presidency, that solidified, at least in an organizational sense, his claim perhaps to lead the church. Although he wasn't in Nauvoo, He wasn't on good terms with the other apostles.
Well, actually, the reason why he was in Pittsburgh at the time was for the presidential bid. He had to establish tenure in Pennsylvania so that they could say Sidney Rigdon as vice president from Pennsylvania. So he was on a mission from Joseph Smith to live in Pittsburgh when he got the word. He had left Nauvoo, I think, a week, maybe 2 weeks before Joseph was arrested and Carthage happened.
But unlike many of the others in Joseph's circle, he was a confirmed monogamist.
Yes.
Had he participated in Joseph's temple rites at that point?
He did, absolutely.
He
was actually, him and Joseph were the first people to perform baptisms for the dead. Of course, their washing and anointing ceremony was just washing the feet back then until Masonry kind of got intermingled with it. But Rigdon and Joseph were the first one to wash each other's feet. So, I mean, trying to say that they were, first and second in command, I think is a wrong perspective. I think they were co-presidents of the church.
But he was not an apostle and did not feel any fellowship or much with the other apostles. Because nowadays, apostle, if there's a passing, counselors of the first president sort of fall back into the quorum of apostles. But then they were fully separate quorums. So he didn't feel any particular affinity or organizational fellowship with the other apostles.
Well, and it's really interesting the Rigdon and Brigham dynamic that existed at the time, because the way I see it, of course, I've constructed these people as like movie characters, and that's how I see them playing out their lives. I see Brigham Young was trying to undermine Joseph's authority for a long time, undermine Rigdon's authority and try and isolate Joseph away from Sidney Rigdon, because Brigham and Rigdon didn't like each other. They were violent enemies, and that really played out in the schism crisis. You read some of the publications, this was a very public fight. They viciously hated each other. Simple as that. Which is why Sidney Rigdon, there's no mention of him in like the Church History Museum here in Salt Lake, not here in Salt Lake, in Salt Lake. Last Sunstone I was at was in Salt Lake, so that's why I said that. But yeah, so the dynamic that they had, Rigdon was actually called a prophet, seer, and revelator in 1843 before Joseph's death. It was published in the Messenger and Advocate. We need to say Sidney Rigdon was ordained to the office of prophet, seer, and revelator, so he was the only other person that Joseph had ordained as a prophet, seer, and revelator before his death. He was the only remaining member of the first presidency. He was ordained as president of the church in 1834 when Joseph moved out to Zion's camp. So on a personal basis, I think Sidney Rigdon should have been the guy, not Brigham Young. Go ahead.
It's my understanding he never received the second anointing though, right?
That's true. He never actually got his official second anointing like the rest of the Quorum of the 12. So that was actually the only argument that Brigham Young had against him. And that was played out in the public square as well.
Do we know why?
I'm not 100% sure why. I don't think Wagner's book didn't go much into detail on that. It just said that he wasn't ordained, and that was kind of what they had as ammunition against him.
Did any of that have to do with the scandal between his daughter and Joseph Smith?
Now that was very possible. So Nancy Rigdon is a big piece that I really didn't touch on because there wasn't enough time, but Nancy Rigdon, Joseph propositioned her, and Sidney Rigdon being so violently opposed to polygamy, he has his friend, the prophet, propositioning his eldest daughter to get married to her, who was 19 at the time, I want to say. Yeah, that kind of drove a wedge in their friendship from then on. So yeah, that probably had a lot to do with it. And I think it also had a lot to do with his perpetual sickness in Nauvoo as well. His melancholy, his fits of never leaving the house for weeks at a time, never giving a sermon, never doing anything with the church for just weeks and weeks at a time. Remarkable individual. All right, any more questions?
Great.
Thank you.
All right, thank you all.
And that is it for this presentation episode. Thank you so much for listening in. Like I said, if you want to watch the video of it, check the show links for the video link to the episode. And you can see the actual video presentation of me presenting to a room full of people. It was good fun, and I really thank the Sunstone Association and Lindsay Hansen Park of the Feminist Mormon Housewives podcast and Year of Polygamy. She's the organizer of the event, and she did a fantastic job putting it together. And everybody there that works with Sunstone, they just put together This is only my second Sunstone, but so far both of them have been an absolute amazing time. This, of course, was just one day, so the one in Utah is, 3 days long, but this was just one day, and it was full of a lot of really good presentations and talks, and I just had just as much fun at that Sunstone as I did at the Utah Sunstone. It's just an absolute pleasure to get together with like-minded ex-Mormons or Mormons and talk about the history and talk about the central issues to bridge these gaps. So to anybody that is interested in going to Sunstone, they have them all over. They have them in Nauvoo, San Diego, Germany. The Sunstone symposiums are everywhere all year long. So please check Sunstone Symposium website. The name escapes me. There will be a link on the show notes for the Sunstone website. Just, indulge yourself and take the time to go to one of these symposiums. It's an absolute pleasure to get together with those people and really talk Mormon history. That being said, that's it for this episode, and the next episode, of course, will be coming on this next Thursday evening, as usual, to get back onto the schedule, and it will be a historical episode discussing, leading up to the Missouri Mormon War of 1838. So, tune in to that this upcoming Thursday, and I hope to talk to you next time here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast.